So hello everybody, you're very welcome back to Law Hero. My name is Jen and I make videos about the law. And today we are talking about something psychological that will help us in the workplace. And it is inspired by my watching of the Jerry Springer documentary on Netflix recently. While I was watching it, something occurred to me when one of the producers was speaking and about the pressure to produce on the Jerry Springer show, and it got ramped up. It got a little bit more salacious, there was more body parts there, and then they realized that the only thing that really sells in America is aggression. So that's why they had, women pulling out each other's hair on stage and whatnot. I even remember watching that as a kid being like, wow, it was, you can't look away as a human being. We just love it. And that's why the Jerry Springer show outperformed Oprah ultimately. And yeah, if you're Gen Z, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. The Jerry Springer show was like a massive part of my childhood, where you'd be like, Jerry, because basically it brought on degenerate people. Like, probably the worst one was the man who married a horse. Yeah, that was disturbing. And it was just all very disturbing. And then in the UK, Jeremy Kyle was a natural follow-on to that. Most people know that from daytime TV, but now that's even been cancelled because it's exploitation of people. Long story short, the thing I picked out of the documentary was something I didn't actually expect, because I was just watching it, when you're just brain dead watching it. I had the flu over Christmas and I was like, okay, I'm going to watch some Netflix. I'm not somebody who watches television, but I was just so wrecked with this flu that everybody had. I was like, okay, I'm going to watch this thing. And I watched it and I was like, oh, that's actually so true. And it was a sentence that one of Jerry's producers, because he had several producers, said something, which was Richard, who was the top producer on Jerry Springer and was the brains behind it all. Jerry Springer was just a front. He was just a nice guy. We don't care about Jerry Springer. We only care about Richard and Toby. So Toby is the producer I'm interested in. That's his picture here. And then Richard is the mastermind, okay? So these are our two characters, okay? And Richard demands a lot of Toby, right? And if we put it down to our circumstances as baby lawyers and people in a corporate or whatnot, or even if you've ever had a boss in your life, if you've ever been in a dynamic where employee-employer, in so much as that person invariably takes on the role of a parent figure. The backstory to this is Toby, our protagonist. His father actually worked on SNL. SNL is a stalwart of American television. In Ireland, it would be equivalent to The Late Late Show. And you can imagine, if your dad is involved in television and has worked on a show as high caliber as SNL, if you're a producer on a startup show, which Jerry Springer was in the 90s, you're going to kind of feel some kind of way about this manipulation of people, because it's not what you know. And this dynamic that was set up between Toby and his father meant that his father rejected what he was doing in work, which meant that Toby became estranged from his father and then gravitated towards this alpha male in his workplace, this Richard character, who by all means, seems to have no conscience whatsoever. You gotta be able to push people to produce, and that was the whole point of the Jerry Springer show. You gotta keep eyes on the show. If people are flicking through, you need them to watch the Jerry Springer show. So this rejection of Toby by his SNL father pushed him towards Richard, the tough and demanding producer of the show. And Toby described Richard as a surrogate father figure, a role that Richard's rigorous and exacting approach uniquely filled. And I've been there. I've been in the workplace. Call it what it is, which is, a dependency on this validation from a parent figure in the workplace. A little bit like workplace romances, which I've spoken about in another YouTube video. I believe this can make you particularly vulnerable, and this is exactly what happened to Toby. And it occurred to me that there is a truth in this, which is when we fail to parent ourselves, so our inner child, we unconsciously seek parent figures in the workplace, in relationships, and in community. And I think it is in relationships, it's codependency, and if you don't work on that and you can't live without that other person and something happens, your whole life is going to fall apart. And it's a bit like, if you're depending on this job for validation and it goes, what is going to be the fallout. And of course we can acknowledge that relationships, workplace and community, they all give us a certain amount of support. We need them, for mentorship, for growth. But of course the dynamic becomes unhealthy when it fills an emotional void left by an absent or unsupportive parent. So how do we stop falling into this trap? Even if you do or not, you may have done so inadvertently in your life, because like it or not, we do rely on other people for validation a lot of the time. It's only a very strong person who can turn that off, and I think it does come with experience. I think I'm definitely at a point in my life now where external validation is becoming playing less and less of a role. And as I move into my motherhood era, I'm actually more concerned about how my future child views me and my character. So obviously we have a need for parental validation. Our parents are our primary caregivers. No matter what you say, you are going to go to your parents for advice. If you have a good relationship with them, they're going to be the first port of call. A lot of the time, that's just what it is. We rely on them for validation, guidance, care. But many of us have unresolved childhood trauma. We just do. And I always say, trauma is not unique. That's why when people are like, my trauma, I'm like, every one of us has trauma, be it with parents, be it with siblings, be it, bullying in school, or, somebody did something to you. Every one of us, to be human, is to have trauma and anxiety and all that stuff. What I'm more interested in is working through it and not passing it on to a child or, somebody else, to your spouse or whatever. And the thing as well is in the workplace that what we don't realise when dealing with human beings is a lot of the time our colleagues are just projecting that childhood trauma and are unconsciously expecting, colleagues or supervisors to meet those unmet emotional needs. And when you don't understand your colleague or your colleague's driving you insane, that's probably what that is. It's just a child crying for something that they didn't get before, they're not getting outside the workplace. So then what does it mean to parent yourself? I don't have a full answer to this, but this is kind of what I think is the right answer. So to parent yourself means to take on the role of nurturing, guiding, and taking on that role that a healthy parent will do. So having empathy, having compassion, saying to yourself, look, you've done enough, just relax now, I'm here for you. And this is you talking to yourself. And it's not about, vilifying your own parents. Like if you ever watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians, you can see there, I think it was a few seasons ago when, the whole Kris Jenner, cheating on Robert Kardashian came out, and, they were speaking about it because Kris had met the man she cheated with, a fella called Todd, I think. She had met up with him again, and you saw with Courtney, her eldest daughter, this brought up a lot of childhood wounds. She's like, how could you cheat on our father? And, she's blaming her mother for a lot of her own trauma. And you can see what happens is, okay, she blames her, but she doesn't get any peace from it, because you have to learn how to heal yourself, by yourself and work through it. So her blaming her mother, and eventually Kris just goes up and goes, oh, you just blame me for everything. you can just blame me for everything, like, you're a victim of everything. Like, what about all the good things I've done for you? Like, it's very easy to come at me when you feel traumatized, but when everything is going right for you, you come nowhere near me. And I can imagine as a parent that it's a very, very difficult thing to accept, because at the end of the day, we're all human, we make mistakes, and we're going to pass on some level of BS to our kids, no matter how hard we try. So I think it's about recognizing that your parents did influence your life. They shaped your decisions, your self-concept, even your relationship dynamics. But you don't have to accept that fully anymore. As an adult, I believe in existentialism from Jean-Paul Sartre, which is, we have to take responsibility over our own lives. And playing the victim and blaming other people, it feels good in the moment, but it's not going to bring you to where you want to get to, which is your ultimate self. So like, as cheesy and as corny as that sounds, you have to ultimately forgive your parents. They're only human. They only, there's a Maya Angelou quote, which is, if you don't know better, you don't do better. I think parenting yourself involves, number one, self-validation. I was saying this during the week. I was down in UCC giving a talk to FE1 students, and I basically said to them that, seeking that external validation it will lead to your ultimate corrosion. And I explained to them in my 20s, when I so desperately wanted to be part of the solicitor profession in order to feel accepted and in order to feel like a functioning human being, I thought that being part of a profession would lead me to happiness, and of course it didn't. It was such a empty, like the song from Linkin Park, The Emptiness Machine. It's like you try and get to this goal, and then when you arrive, you're like, wow, this is not what I thought it was going to be. Now, I'm very happy as a solicitor, but being part of the profession is never the bit that brought me happiness. What brought me happiness is connecting with other people, and it took me a while to realise that that's what I was ultimately striving for. What would have been better is if I had just said, like, I'm proud of me for who I am rather than what I have. And that's a lesson you learn the hard way as an A-type personality. The second thing is emotional regulation. So learning how to comfort yourself during the bad times. So like when you hit rock bottom, that you're able to crawl your way out. I would say the other one then is setting boundaries in the workplace. You don't have to be everybody's friend. You don't have to do everything for everybody, like you did in, when you were a kid growing up, or, if you were the peacemaker. You don't have to play that role anymore. It's professional, and you don't need your emotional needs met in the workplace. Become your own role model. Like Jordan Peterson, as much as he is going a bit mad there now recently, I would say I did like one of his quotes, and I remember it stuck with me, which was, treat yourself like someone worth caring about, or something like that. It was along those lines. But what that kind of meant to me was like someone who matters. Are you treating yourself like someone who matters? Are you putting yourself to bed? Are you eating well? Are you treating your inner child? Are you caring for them? Like, are you spending all your money? Are you putting some money away for your future child? You know what I mean? Like, are you treating yourself like a parent would treat a child, with like absolute love, unconditional love? That's hard. That's really hard, especially if you're quite a negative person or you have negative self-talk. It's really hard to be nice to yourself. Like, I have that problem where I think if I'm sitting down, I feel guilty because I was always taught to work hard. So for me to like not work hard, I feel guilty, and I feel like I don't deserve to sit down until I've worked myself to the bone. But I've had to learn the hard way that it's not a representation of my value, how much I've worked. It's hard. It's hard, especially if you're conditioned like that. Obviously, I don't have to point out the dangers of seeking parental figures at work. There's no problem having a mentor, but it can go too far sometimes. And yeah, so I would say develop that self-compassion, seek therapy if you've unresolved childhood trauma. Build a support network, like have good friends. Your friends are your historians. They know your life, they know your ups and downs, but that's the thing as well, like they know your ups. Celebrate your successes. Like, don't wait for, this is the big thing I always say to people when you start off in a job, don't wait for praise yourself, because if you're looking for praise, you're going to be very disappointed. A lot of people, even though they appreciate what you do, they don't have time to tell you because they're so busy with their own kids, their own life, their own boss. They might rarely have time to validate you. So that's a big risk you run when you look for external validation, even from your own spouse or romantic lover. Don't be sitting around waiting for them to go, aren't you great? Like, sometimes, like, we just did up the house obviously, and sometimes I'm like to my other half, isn't it great what I did with the curtains? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, you're supposed to tell me that I picked the perfect colour, the perfect width, the perfect diameter. Like, how would I have known about all this curtain stuff? Because I did all this research. And I'm like almost waiting for him to thank me, even though like we paid for them together. Like he did all the measuring of the curtains. I just went and picked them out next.ie. It's interesting how I felt the need. Like, I'm like, tell me how great I am, and I can't help it. But I'm like checking myself. I'm like, don't do that. Like, don't look for that from him. So yeah, ultimately, this is just to caution you. Like, so I'm just saying, this is to my trainees, this is my baby lawyers, this is to like anybody who follows me who's in a professional role, like consultancy, like tech or whatever it is. Are you looking for that validation in the workplace? Is it an unresolved emotional need? Do you look for it in relationships? Do you look for it in friendships? If so, why? And can you recognize it and be there for yourself? Also in sport. This is also applicable to sports people. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. You probably know more than me because I'm all new to this. But yeah, that was my thoughts from the Jerry Springer. Not what you thought it was. See you in the next one.